So during the entire set of videos that I've been recording, we've been working our way through this very point here, which is we've already seen how to run all of the pipelines that we created, how to run our system from our local computers, how to deploy our models, how to deploy locally, how to deploy on an on-prem server or AWS or Azure. We've seen all of that. But the only thing that we've not discussed yet is how can we actually run all of these pipelines in a remote environment in the cloud? How can we run them at scale? How can we distribute those pipelines in a cloud environment? And that is precisely what we are going to see right now. So if you go to the README file and you go to the section not deploying the model to SageMaker, sorry, but you need to go to the session, let me get to that point, deploying to AWS managed services. In this section here, we're going to talk about how we can run our pipelines in AWS Batch. Remember, one of the things that I think I mentioned before is that we have the ability, when we're building a pipeline, we have the ability to grab one single step. And maybe that step is very heavy in resources. And we want that step to maybe use a GPU. And we have the ability to request using an annotation for that step to say, we want one GPU or we want this much memory. In fact, I think if I go and open the training pipeline, one of the steps I added like a sample requesting of resources. Here you have it. So here I'm requesting this much memory in order to run this step. Okay. So this ability for us to fulfill this functionality, we need to be able to run this in a place where we can actually supply those resources. Okay. So in this session, we're going to see how we do this with AWS Batch, how we orchestrate and how we run all of our pipelines in AWS. So one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that Metaflow has two modes. Okay, so number one is the local mode, and that's what we've been using so far, which is running Metaflow completely 100% locally. But there is also a shared mode. Okay, and shared mode of Metaflow is what we use when we want to run Metaflow in a production environment. Okay, so one page that I want you to take a look at is behind this link, Metaflow Service Architecture. I'm not going to go into details there. I just want you to read what's in this page, but you will understand a little bit more about the shared mode architecture and how Metaflow is going to distribute the different components that make up its architecture, like the scheduler, the object store, the Metaflow services, how Metaflow stores metadata and where it stores the metadata. So I want you to spend a little bit of time reading this page. Again, is behind the link Metaflow Services Architecture. And after that, I just want you to prepare your AWS account. Now, in order to do that, there is also another link that you're going to have to open, which is this link here. Notice that I say to get started, create a new CloudFormation stack named Metaflow. You can name the stack however you want, but if you name it Metaflow, all of the other commands are going to work. So just name it Metaflow by following the AWS managed with CloudFormation instructions. This page here contains the explanation of how to run this CloudFormation template. Now, I can tell you it's very simple, and unless you're planning to modify something, you don't have to go through these instructions because we already created other CloudFormation templates. What you need to do, however, is just click on the AWS CloudFormation template link. This is going to go to GitHub, and you're going to see the CloudFormation there, okay? This CloudFormation is provided by Metaflow, okay? Not by me. I did not create this CloudFormation template. Click on that link and download it right here. There's a button where you can download that to your local computer. And after you do that, you're going to go to your CloudFormation page right here, maybe right here, and then you are going to create a new stack. and I named mine Metaflow. That's how I want you to name your stack. This stack will take, in my computer or in my account, it took 13 minutes to finish. So it takes some time, okay? You need to be patient. It's going to take 13 minutes to finish deploying all of the resources behind this stack. There is a bunch of stuff that you need to configure to get your account ready, okay? Keep in mind, you don't want to mess around this CloudFormation stack if you are not willing to get charged. Everything that this stack is creating instances, it's going to charge you money, okay? So just number one, if you're messing around, keep that in mind. Number two, as soon as you're done with it, just delete that stack, because if you forget that stack, you are going to get charged, okay? And those charges, hurt, especially if you didn't have to pay for them. Obviously, if you're deploying this at a company, it's just no problem. Sure, you're gonna get charged, but who cares? All right, so let's say you do that. You create your stack. You wait the 13, 14 minutes that it takes. After you're done with that, the next step is to configure Metaflow in your environment so Metaflow recognizes that it can also deploy to the cloud. So you're gonna give Metaflow all of the settings that Metaflow needs in order to make those, to deploy your pipelines to the cloud. I created a simple command to do that. If you follow the instructions here in this page, I think this page is gonna tell you everything that you need to do. You're gonna have to do it manually. You can also just run my command here that I created. This is going to grab the outputs of the CloudFormation file and create the local Metaflow configuration that you need. And that's the command that I want you to run. Now, I ran this command already, but I'm going to show you here what the file looks like, okay? The configuration for Metaflow is going to be inside my home directory. There is a Metaflow config, and there should be a file called config production. And if I list the content of that file, you're going to see all of the settings that Metaflow will use. All of those values are pointing to my account, okay? And I got those values from the outputs of this stack. So those values are right here from all of these outputs. Now, I did not have to go one by one. I created the command, so the command did that for me automatically, okay? So it's very quick just to run that command. Now, as soon as you create this config-production file, you are going to need another config file, which is going to be the config _ local file. And this file here contains just an empty JSON object with no config inside. This config local file will allow you to keep running Metaflow locally on your environment. So it's not always going to be about running up there. You're going to be running it locally on your environment, okay? So I have a line here that will create that file for you. If you're using, or if you're opening that project using Project IDX, I already created that file for you. So I had it beforehand. But if not, you just can run this line and that will create the file. It doesn't matter if you run the line multiple times, it's just gonna create the file from scratch. There is a variable that's called Metaflow profile. That variable defines by default what configuration is Metaflow gonna be using, okay? So here, if you export that variable and you say this variable will have production, then Metaflow will be using the config in the config _ production file. If you set it to local, Metaflow is going to be using the local config. So what value you're going to set depends on how you want to run these pipelines. If 90% of the time you're just running the pipelines locally, just set this value to local. And then whenever you want to run it in production, you can specify a value for that particular command, like I'm doing here. Like here, I'm showing you how to run the training pipeline using the local configuration, okay? That's what I'm doing here. you could just swap these two. So set the Metaflow profile for local, and then whenever you want to run in production, you are just going to specify production right here. Okay, all cool, all dandy. Now it's time to run the training pipeline in AWS Batch. Now, this is going to take some time to finish, okay? But here is the command that you're going to use, okay? Notice that here I'm using with -- with batch and -- with retry. So I'm adding these two parameters to the same command that I was using before to run my training pipeline. What these parameters do, these parameters are defined by Metaflow, is these parameters are going to add a decorator batch and a decorator retry to every single one of my steps. So the start step will get these two decorators, the deployment, not the deployment, but the train step, the evaluate step, all of those steps are going to get these two decorators. So it's the same thing as me going here to the code and saying, you know what, this step is going to have the batch decorator and it's going to have the retry decorator. Same thing as me doing this thing. I'm just doing it from outside, okay? So that way I'm indicating that I want to run this pipeline, and all of the steps of this pipeline I want to run in AWS Batch. Now, you don't have to do it like this, okay? You could just mark one of these steps as being, I want this step to run in AWS Batch and the rest of steps in my computer. In which case, you don't have to use the with batch outside. You just need to mark you mark your specific step, to decorate your specific step with batch. In my case, because I want the entire pipeline to run in AWS Batch, I'm going to use the with batch here and with retry. Why do I use with retry? Because when you're using this in the cloud, sometimes it fails. So as long as you're sure that you can re-execute one of your steps without causing any problems, by using with retry, you will overcome any failures that are temporary, okay? That, you know, if your step fails, you're going to retry again and it might succeed at that point. So if I try to run this right now, it's going to take a long time to finish, okay? But you are going to see, you're going to realize just by looking at the logs how different those logs are, because those logs are running all of the system in the cloud. So let me just start running it. I might not let it finish just because it takes a long time for it to finish. But I'm going to come here. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to clear so you get, you know, first share view of this thing. And I'm going to run my pipeline in AWS. Remember, by default here, I'm using the production configuration of Metaflow. So Metaflow knows how to communicate with AWS right now to run all of this, okay? Notice a couple things. Number one, the ID of the pipeline is only number 3. Now, let me show you in MLflow, because I had this, I ran this already before. These long IDs that you see here, let me just make them bigger. The long IDs that you see here, those were the IDs generated when I was running Metaflow on my computer. Okay, so I ran these three pipelines on my computer. But you also see 1 and 2. Those were generated when I was running this in production. Okay, so you get those two numbers. Now we're getting number 3. Now that's a clear indication that I'm running it in AWS now, not the long number. Okay, so that's the first thing, the first clue that you're going to notice. The second clue is this long ID, you will not get that when you were running that locally. Now look at the logs. Task is starting, status submitted. Task is starting, status runnable. Task is starting, status starting. You see all of those steps? What's happening there is that the specific instances that need to be created in order to run the start step are just starting and they're running and now they are just submitted and they go through all of those steps. Okay? That is running up there, not down here, but up there in the cloud, okay? So again, it's right now it's just starting the, cross-validation started, transform started. So it's going through the whole process. I'm just gonna stop this because again, it's gonna take quite a bit of time to finish. You're gonna have to believe me here, but it's going to finish and it's going to just deploy the model, not deploy the model, but submit the model to MLflow, just like we did before. You can even see here, let me just refresh this page to see what we got. Like you can see here, version 5 of the model I created in AWS Batch, and that was for this run number 2. Obviously, run number 3 I just canceled, so that's not gonna have any version of the model. So that is how you run the training process up there. But I'm still using my local computer to schedule that flow. Remember, scheduling the flow, you have a bunch of different steps. It's a directed cyclical graph, bunch of different steps. Something has to schedule after the start step comes the cross-validation step. And when you finish, I'm going to let you start. All of that orchestration still happening on my computer. So how do I completely deploy this to the cloud? I don't want my computer involved here anymore. I actually want to schedule the running of my pipelines. I want my training pipeline to run every Monday morning at 9 a.m. How do I do that? Well, for that, we use step functions, which is a service provided by AWS. So if you scroll down here, you're going to see there is a line here that's going to tell you how we can prepare my training pipeline as a step function. So you're going to see this is pretty cool. I'm just going to run this command, which again is using step functions create. This is going to make it possible to run later. So I'm going to run this. Let's do this. It's going to take less than a minute, a few seconds to finish. Let's just wait for it to finish. Okay, so it says state machine penguins.user training for flow training pushed to AWS step function successfully. That's what you want to see. And then it says no triggers defined. You need to launch this workflow manually. Guess what? Metaflow supports the concept of triggers. So if you go to Metaflow, you Google Metaflow triggers. Okay, you can see here that there will be triggers like triggering flows based on external events, triggering flows based on other flows. Let me go to external events. I want a trigger for a specific date. Like, look at this. This trigger is for when data was updated or a phase of the moon. I mean, you can create here all cool triggers and whatnot. Bottom line, a trigger will tell step functions when to start a flow. And you can do it by date, when your data is updated. When something else finishes, like I could schedule my deployment pipeline and trigger that deployment pipeline whenever there is a new version of the model in MLflow. So as soon as that trigger fires, my deployment pipeline will automatically engage or run. All right, so we have that in step functions. I think I added a command here. So if I run this command, this is going to show me my state machines. And let me see what I got here. So I got a deployment state machine. I have a training state machine, obviously. I have another training state machine here. So obviously I've created this before. So you can list the state machines that you have. If you go to AWS and you look for step functions, we should see our step functions here. So let me go here. This is the one that we just created. And here, let me see definition. Look at this. This is beautiful. This is the definition of the step machine that we just created. And as you can see, this is nothing other than my pipeline, my flow. So there is a start step, and then the cross-validation, transform, and all of this is within a for each. And then you get an evaluate model and then register model. Anyway, all of this definition, all of this was created by Metaflow for me. I did not have to create this. All of this was automatically pushed here. And now you can just run this. Now, how do you run this? Well, you can trigger that by saying Python pipelines training, step functions, trigger. So by me triggering the step function, I can just, the step function that I just created is just going to start working. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take this. By the way, you can also trigger it from AWS. So I can go to AWS and create an execution. Okay, so I'm going to trigger the pipeline. So hope it works. Okay. So it says workflow, Penguins, user training, triggered, and AWS step functions. And here is the run ID that we can use to check it if we wanted to. So if I go here, I go to the execution tabs, you see now that this is running. So this is the training pipeline running in the cloud, training a new model. We're going to have to wait for this to finish. But we should see at some point when we refresh, there should be another run name that is not going to be number 3. It's going to be a new one. Let's just wait for it to show. It's going to take some time for it to warm up and whatnot. Here it is. So you can now see it right here. It says SFN, which I'm supposed it means state function N something. I'm guessing that's what it means. But here is the one that's currently running right now. We're going to wait for it to finish. Let's see if it finishes with the model. But now this is completely running in the cloud. I am not involved on running this whatsoever. Now, again, like I said, I can schedule that to trigger at any point in time. I created here a command. If you run this command, it's just going to get you back the status of that task, so you don't even have to go to the UI. I don't know if this command is going to work because I haven't tried it for a long time. Let's see. Okay, it did work, and you can see here basically the execution. So it says the output, I know what's happening here. So this command, just keep that in mind. This command is looking for one state machine that ends in training, but I have 2 of them because I'm running those 2 state machines with different users. When I run the state machine from my computer, my username on that computer is SVPINO. The username from Project IDX is just user. Therefore, 2 state machines were created, both of them related to the training process. So if I go to state machines, you're going to see this state machine and this state machine. This is the one that's running right now. This is the one that I created before. You can see it here, October 3rd. So I'm going to delete this one here so it doesn't come, it doesn't affect the command that I'm running, because the command is just grabbing the first one that shows up and it's looking for executions inside, okay? So I'm going to wait for that state machine to just go away, rerun my command, and that should give me the status of the execution that's actually running, okay? All right, so going back here, well, that works. After this section, I'm not going to go through the details. You can follow along now, but I'm going to show you how to run the deployment pipeline. And you're going to have to do something else before being ready to run the deployment pipeline in the cloud. And that is, remember, we had this parameter, which is assume role. What happens is that state machines and AWS Batch, all of those are running under the credentials created by the Metaflow CloudFormation stack. That CloudFormation stack created the credentials and the permissions and all of that good stuff. But I am running flows that require additional permissions. Like, for example, in the case of deployment, one of those flow, or the deployment flow, requires the permission of creating an endpoint. That permission was not originally included in the permissions that the stack gives me, the Metaflow stack. That was, again, is the default stack provided by Metaflow. I had two options. Option number one was to modify that stack and just give you a copy of it. Instead of pointing you to that stack, I will give you my own version of that stack, including the permissions to deploy models. I did not want to do that because I need to keep then an eye on their stack. Every time they make a modification on their stack, I'm going to have to change mine. So I didn't want to do that. So their stack is their stack. They can improve it. They can change it if they want to. I'm always going to point you to that stack. But I need those permissions somehow. So in order to do that, to get those permissions, I'm going to be assuming a role. And in order to assume the role, first, we need to modify the permissions of the stack that we're creating. And that is what this command is going to do. This command is just going to connect to the roles. And there is one specific role, which is called batch S3 task role. And we are going to add to that role. By the way, this role was created by their CloudFormation. When I say their, I mean Metaflow's CloudFormation. I'm going to add the ability to assume a role. Okay? So basically what I'm saying here is you can assume another role that I will later tell you which role to assume. And that other role that you're going to assume is going to have the right permission. So you run this. This is going to provide the ability for that specific role to assume a different role. And at the time of deploying to running the pipeline, you can say assume role, and then you're going to pass the role that we created before. I don't know if you remember, we executed an ML School CloudFormation stack that has the proper permissions. So at the time of deploying a model, I can say assume this other role, and now you're going to have permissions to deploy the model. Okay, again, that was a mouthful. There is a lot of stuff that's going on there with CloudFormation. The good news is, if you have done AWS before, you know exactly what I mean. If not, you can just dig a little bit deeper and all of this is going to make sense. It's more complex to explain it than to actually get it done. All right, so just by creating this, you can run the deployment flow just like you did before. If you wanted to schedule it and to orchestrate it from step functions, same command like we did before. Step functions create, that will create an entry for you, and then you will do trigger, and that will start the workflow. By the way, you can specify when you trigger a workflow, you can specify parameters, and those parameters are the ones that are going to be passed to the flow, to the pipeline when it's running in AWS. Okay, and again, this here is the same describe execution command that is going to tell you how that execution is going. Let me go back here to MLflow. Let's see if that finished. So this finished. It was successful. It has not registered the model yet, apparently. It might have failed. Let me just check and see why it didn't register the model. But we're going to figure that out right now. So here is the training pipeline. Here's it's still running. It hasn't finished yet. I thought it was done, but it hasn't finished yet. So if we click here, this tells you exactly what it is. You can see that it's still evaluating the model. So evaluate model is still not green. So it's still working on it. So we're going to have to just wait a little bit longer until this finishes evaluating the model, and then it needs to register the model. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, I'm making you wait through the process of running this in the cloud, but I think it was important for you to see it. I did not create the code for you to do the same thing in Azure or Google, but all of that code is out there. Outer Bounds here, the page that I send you, you can see that deploying Metaflow, if you go to this page, let me actually make this a little bit bigger. But when you go to deploy Metaflow, there is AWS Managed Services, which is the one that we just saw. You can do it in AWS, but using Kubernetes. You can do it in Azure using Kubernetes. You can do it in Google Cloud using Kubernetes. So all of these are instructions on what you have to do to configure those cloud platforms to run all of your code. Your code does not change. That's the beauty of it. Nothing that you've done in that code, in those pipelines, you need to change. The code stays the same. The only thing that's changing is where you're running that code, okay? So here they're gonna give you instructions, like in the case of Google Cloud. Here they're gonna give you instructions on how to configure Google Cloud. They have a Terraform template that you have to execute just to run all of your Metaflow stuff there, okay? That's one of the things. Okay, so register the model is now done. So if we go to ML School and we refresh, okay, there we go. Penguins version 6, and this Penguins model was created entirely in AWS, which is beautiful. One of the beautiful things about this is that we built all of these flows, all of these pipelines. We built them once, and now we can run them anywhere, on your computer, on a remote computer, on-premise, like whatever, in the cloud, in AWS, in Azure, in Google. That is extremely powerful because it gives you portability. Now you're not tied to any specific platform. You can use AWS while it's convenient, and as soon as it gets expensive for you, you can just move all of your stuff to a different cloud provider or to your own infrastructure, and you don't have to change anything, which is great. So hopefully you enjoyed this. And yeah, I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.